All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out today for our presentation. Quick question. Was there anyone out there who thought that this was taking place yesterday? Okay, well, thank you for making a second trip. We appreciate that, and I'm sure it'll be worth your while. My name's Mike Holland. I am a board member on the Los Angeles City Historical Society, and due to a set of circumstances, both the president and vice president are not able to do the official welcoming this afternoon, so you have me. Just a couple of quick acknowledgments and housekeeping notes. This series would not be possible without the participation of the Los Angeles Central Library, the History and Genealogy divisions, and so we thank them for making this space available and making Russell, our AV tech up there, available to us to make sure that you can see us and hear us, and we will be recording this conversation, and so it will be available probably on the Historical Society's website. That'll be coming out. As a matter of fact, if you're not a Society member, one way to stay on top of what's going on, whether it's a presentation like this or whether it's any of the walking tours or some of the other things that the Society does, would be to join up, sign up with any of our board members. As a matter of fact, do we have any board members in the House? Okay. Again, due to the unforeseen events I already mentioned, we probably don't have any membership forms unless someone has forms stashed in their pockets or purse. But we will be back here in the same room a month from today, Sunday, March 11th, for the second in our series, and that one is going to be focusing during Women's History Month, and our speaker is going to be Supervisor Janice Hahn. And the subject is going to be basically 7 decades of the Hahn family in local politics. And so that should be very, very interesting, I hope, and I hope you'll find it as well. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure a few people will continue to trickle in. That's all right. We're going to start off with a couple of audiovisual clips, a little bit of audio tape followed by a few minutes of videotape on the screen here. And I'm going to ask for your indulgence for that because it's going to do something. It's going to help set the context of what Bob will have to say, I hope. We've had some interesting lunches over the last few months, and so I know that he has a lot to say, and he is going to have as much time to say it, and to say all of it. But for a few minutes anyway, I want to show him as he was in his council days. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of sum up what I think is the theme for the 2018 Marie Northrop Lecture Series, which we're calling We Are Change. In a nutshell, we're talking about people who have made positive change and direct change to the city of Los Angeles and the local area, partially because of who they are, where they came from, and their contributions. And ironically, and this is going to be in one of the video clips, I'm going to paraphrase Bob on this one right now. And this is going to be, I think, a takeaway that I hope will be not only for today, but for the entire series going forward. I paraphrased a little bit. They came to our town and they made their contributions as one who were part of it. And in building their careers, they also contributed to the growth of our community as a whole. And you'll hear Bob recite most of those words in a clip in just a minute or two, but I saw that and thought that would be a perfect bridge through the series this year, because some of the same questions that Bob is going to be asked today, if I get the chance, are going to be asked of Supervisor Hahn next month and our panel in June. So some of those same issues, some of those same themes are going to come up in addition to their unique perspectives, their unique experiences. And as I said, we're starting with no one more unique and definitely more experienced than we are today with Bob Farrell. Okay. And so without further ado, let us go ahead and go to the, there's going to be about a 4 or 5 minute audio clip followed by a few minutes of video. And so take it away, Russell.
Madam President, thank you for permitting me to make a few remarks on the anti-apartheid ordinance which you are about to discuss and vote on. We established a momentum that was carried across this nation. Other cities, various states, and even the Congress finally joined the act. I can remember that when Bishop Tutu was last in our city, he made the comment that a year earlier he could not have believed that such momentum would have been gathered and that such an impact would be made on the South African government by the actions of divestiture expressed by various governmental agencies and various individuals in this country. You have helped to lead the way in that effort. And today, before you is an ordinance that I think will take us the final step in terms of economic sanctions that indicate to the repressive government of South Africa that we and 73% of the people of South Africa have waited long enough.
Madam President, if you would, I think you will. Mr. Farrell and I have arranged a telephone hookup with Bishop Desmond Tutu, and I believe that's the phone call that has come in. So if you will just allow me to...
Hello? Hello, Bishop?
Hello.
Bishop? Is coming on the line right now.
Hello, Bishop Tutu.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
We're doing just fine, thank you.
Happy anniversary, I understand.
Thank you very much, yes.
Bishop Tutu, as you probably know, the City Council is in the middle now of a debate, which, if we pass a law today, would stop the contracting of city work with companies which do business in South Africa.
Yes.
And we wanted to talk to you today and give you an opportunity to share your thoughts with us as we take on this very important discussion.
Bob? Yes. Well, Bishop, thank you so very much for taking our call. We thought that this was just an auspicious time for our city council and our city. And we wanted to share this moment with you because you were here when the process began.
Yeah.
You stood with our mayor when the mayor put forward the proposal to the council, and you came out making a rather forthright statement about how perhaps others in places like the United States, local governments like ourselves, should address the whole issue of divestment.
Yeah.
And we're literally
I'm ready. Are you ready for me?
Yes.
Because I'm sorry. I mean, our daughter has got quite a few people. So I would like to get back to the party.
Yes.
But I mean, I think what we're doing is important. And so if you want me to say something, I'm ready to say so.
Bishop, you are now speaking to the City Council. They are all listening to you, the entire City Council.
May I first of all say good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great privilege to address you. You are a great city, and what you decide on many issues, but especially on this one, will have repercussions beyond your city boundaries. Los Angeles is not a small little nondescript town. What Los Angeles does will be sending ripples throughout the world. What you do will give new heart to the victims of apartheid and will shatter the morale of the perpetrators of one of the most vicious systems in the world. I admire your mayor and those who have supported him in the past in the actions that he has taken to try and help South Africa become free for all South Africans, black and white.
Thank you very much, Bishop.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you. God bless all of you.
God bless you, sir.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Mr. President, members of council. I support the proposal put forward by Joan Flores. I think it's good and appropriate, and I'd hope that as we put forward our own plans, that we take what we have learned, given the patterns of input that have come from the public, and figure out how we are going to better the framework of the Brown Act to meet the needs of the people of the city of Los Angeles. It was no major adjustment in the way that we worked for us to comply with the Brown Act requirements in the first place. And even though it may take a little bit longer in terms of time on the clock to do something, I don't think that we have made worse decisions because of that. I think the decisions that we have made are better. And more than that, members of the council, I believe that the process helps people in their feeling good about their city council, and they're buying into their system of governance, and they're basically buying into the decisions that we collectively make. This is a good motion. I support it wholeheartedly.
Jim Zumberg, as being a man that I guess if these were other times you would say, he came to our town and he made his contributions as one who was part of it, and in building his institution, he also contributed to the growth of our community. Therefore, we should look to him and call him a citizen. And if there's anyone who could bear that with more dignity and pride, well, I just don't know who that is. Because in the time that Jim Zumberg has been president of the University of Southern California, at least in the 8th District, the relationship of the school to its adjacent neighborhoods and community changed dramatically. I'd like to suggest that under his administration, what was perceived as somewhat confrontational has changed to be cooperative. What was adversary has now just developed to be somewhat of associative. And I think that goes a long way to looking at the person at the top. I absolutely believe, I believe as you do, members of the council, that the person on the top is the accountable individual. And most certainly as it relates to the University of Southern California, Jim Zumberg as president has assumed that responsibility and carried it well on behalf of the university and his community and all of its neighboring associated neighborhoods, the community groups in the neighborhood. And I'm very proud as councilperson to say, Jim, we're going to miss you. You leave a tremendous challenge to your successor, and we just hope that he is going to be able to carry that part of the burden well. Thank you very, very much for your service to our city and community. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Wax, I'm pleased you said what you did, but I would like to do more than appeal to the commissioners, because for years I have tried to do the best I could without a constituency base on behalf of Native Americans to basically pose the question, what's the problem? Now, I understand all the cultural things that get in the way, but notwithstanding that, where is the advocacy? Where's the advocacy on health? Where's the advocacy so that this city can do better than have that abominable place, that little nasty alley? There's a little alley right down here on Skid Row. Now, I respect what the men and women are doing working in that particular agency. We can do better. We can bring that for Native Americans out of that alley and put it into something better in the Central Business District. We're doing it for homeless men and women. We're using a variety of nonprofits. I'd like to push you, bring forward the nonprofit. And if there are problems with the constituencies in terms of aggressive advocacy, as I understand the Native American population, there are aggressive and people who are prepared to get on the cutting edge and go beyond it in the United States. What does it take to bring that kind of Native American advocacy into this city? I mean, I really feel bad that 4 of you are coming on at the same time, because that suggests that we haven't done our job well in the city of Los Angeles in demanding of the commission commitment that we made that a product come out. And I think that in part has been because we have been courteous and kind and we have wanted to see internal development in the Native American community and not want to go faster than that. But I'd like to encourage you all that you really ought to put it on the line. The council is prepared probably to go faster than you all. And I'd appreciate it if you, I'm one of the council members, along with Wax, that would like to see it. If you need staff, if you need additional resources, please don't just go over there and sit down and do busy work around agenda and don't tell us. I'd like to extend this as a political invitation to you all. Please use the council and the political process. This whole organization is a $6 billion corporation, and on behalf of the Native American community, we don't get the demands that are appropriate for the needs there. So commissioners, on behalf of this fellow, I'm pleased that you're there. I'm going to vote for you, but I have high expectations that you're really going to be aggressive advocates.
20 grand.
All right, Mr. Farrell.
Well, Mr. President, members of council, well, Mr. Yaroslavsky, these have been called in the past. I've called them, and I think that the cumulative result of that has led to the police chief having as one of the items by which we measure his effectiveness the reduction of these kind of claims against the city. And since I'm not going to be able to speak on the other items that are before us, I'd like to see perhaps if we don't vote on this one today, and at least have our staff come and see how we might be able to quantify this and look at it in the context of the chief's goals. He is with the group of general managers who we've already reviewed and approved. But as we begin to get bits of information like this that specifically run counter to his own stated goals, I think we should call for accountabilities each step of the way. I mean, that couple of $100,000 could go to good use in my district. Why should I vote to pay for it for this at a time with a shrinking budget? I mean, we should have that kind of discussion, perhaps in executive session. It was something that the chief put forward himself, and I think we ought to hold him to it. We have the documents. We approved it about 5 months ago, and he's going to get his pay raise in just a few months because we did approve this. But this is an element of his own program that he said he was going to work to reduce. And I think that based on the fact that that document exists, that's an agreement that the council made with the chief of police. We ought to literally call him to task on this one. This is the first one to come by since that agreement was adopted by us. And we should not pay it, and we should call the manager to task and say, you put forward your goal, and here's the first $200,000. What you going to do about it? And I think that provides the context for asking about a reasonable request from us would be, what was the discipline provided to these several officers, if any at all? What was the nature of the investigation, if any at all? There's no reference to that here, and I think we need to have that as just a matter of our record. So I'd like to ask that we hold this for an appropriate time, invoke the agreement, that is the agreement with the chief of police, with the commissioner, the mayor, and this council, and ask him to come to speak to this. So I so move.
I would ask you, if you're going to make a motion to continue, that it be for a short time, because
Short time, yes.
I think our attorneys, there is a financial issue.
What would be an
here, too.
appropriate time to do that?
I think a week would be plenty.
Good.
And ask, are you asking for the...
And ask the chief to come over, and have Jack Driscoll come here to once again remind us, because Ms. Pikus isn't here to just speak to it, but for those of you who are on Personnel Committee, remember that's part of his contract with us.
Okay.
And on another motion, we're looking to a proposed charter change to have contractual relationships with him. Here's one where we already have the contractual relationship. This is one to which he should be held.
And you're asking also that the personnel aspect of it, the disciplinary, if any, also
be brought forward at the same time.
Yeah, I would second it.
On behalf of the City Council, I'm pleased to present a resolution to Nelson Mandela. We're proud that he comes to our city. We admire his determination. And I must tell you, Mr. Mandela, that Bob Farrell, my colleague on the City Council, who was elected in 1974, started talking about apartheid in South Africa when many of us didn't know what it meant. Bob Farrell started it in 1974. On behalf of my colleagues on the City Council, I want to present this resolution to you and welcome you to Los Angeles.
And there you have just a small fraction of Bob Farrell's work in the city of LA, and hopefully we'll be able to expand upon what you've seen, use that as the context for some of the things we hope to be talking about. But right now, let me just give a quick introduction to Bob, and then we can, get to the real meat of the presentation today. He was a freedom writer, a reporter for the California Eagle. He was first a field deputy to Councilmember Billy Mills before being asked by Mayor Tom Bradley to run for his seat in 1974. And he was council member from 1974 into 1991. He has continued to work in a variety of socially conscious endeavors since leaving office, and in 2016 went to Philadelphia as a delegate for the Bernie Sanders campaign. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is now time for Bob Farrell to speak for himself. The stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. When I was at UCLA, I read a book that really affected my life. It was a book by a fellow by the name of Frantz Fanon. And in The Wretched of the Earth, he made an appeal for us. And the way I read it, he was speaking to me as an American, African-American, black, Negro, whatever. He was speaking to me. And he spoke to the merit of being a person, to being a man, one who was loyal to himself and his own dreams and his own ideas, and one who was dedicated, as he was writing in the context of what was happening with France and Algeria and the rest, not just to make for a better France or a better Algeria, a better Africa, but for me it was like making for a better America. And I was saying to myself, what in the world is this about? All that experience at UCLA, the enlightenment that came to me in the years between 1956, when I first arrived, and 1961, when I graduated, in the year of the Freedom Rides, it was an escalation and expanding consciousness. I got to UCLA because I won a scholarship. I won the scholarship because I was in the U.S. Navy. And I was a diligent young fellow. And the officer on my first ship, the USS Muncie, ATF 107, a fleet tugboat, saw some value in me as being just more than a person who should just be in the Navy working as an enlisted man. I took a little test, and I aced it. And I went to the Naval Academy Prep School in Bainbridge, Maryland. It's a place where men and women out of the military are prepared to go to the Naval Academy. It's something to give us an opportunity to polish up, because usually the competition is that folks go to the military academies straight out of high school, and there's their prep, and they'll go on to ROTC and things like that. Mainly a dose of academic discipline, and the Navy having an opportunity to check us out to see if, in fact, they want to let us continue our service, or do we go back to the fleet? And I did well there, and I had an invitation to go to the Naval Academy or to go to an ROTC program. I chose ROTC over Annapolis because at UCLA there was a curriculum called Near Eastern Studies. I was fascinated by images of northeastern Africa. I was fascinated by the Holy Land. I was fascinated by this area of the world that was basically put together in some kind of framework as a result of things in World War I. And I was also a fan of Lawrence of Arabia on the side. And the fact that this romantic person was actually involved in drawing lines on paper that determined nationality. How the heck could that happen? Anyway, I got excited, applied to UCLA, got to UCLA, and I was just a proper student for year one. While at UCLA in year one, I came up to the American reality. I'm a colored guy. No Negroes living in Westwood. The Negroes who have good housing and have a good time at UCLA in those days, in terms of their acceptance on campus, were primarily the athletes. Is that a surprise? But anyway, for the rest of us, it was a matter of driving or catching a bus to come from South Los Angeles to get to Westwood, because it was certain that we weren't going to be living in Westwood. The housing on campus was not yet developed. So we, in essence, were commuters. 2 or 3 places where black ladies, students, were participating. Hershey Hall, and then in Santa Monica, over towards Santa Monica, a place called Stevens House. And that was it for Negro students at UCLA. Those of us who were young, not veterans returning, but for those of us who were young getting into the academic cycle. So on campus, the excitement of just being there and personal growth and meeting students from around the world, besides being part of a YWCA co-op program, which on campus had the ladies, multicultural situation, living on campus, and young men like myself coming in for cooking and studying and things like that, and having a nice student activity in the framework of the programs of the YMCA on campus, YWCA on campus. Wow. That multicultural experience, Near Eastern Studies at UCLA. My first student participation in an organization was with the Young Arab Organization. And how did I get to the Young Arab Organization? Once again, fascinated by my major, I found people on campus who came from those places. So when we talk about 1956, that was about the time the Algerians were doing their number. You know, I was wrapped up with Gamal Abdel Nasser. I'm looking at these men primarily from all over the place, from Syria, from Lebanon, from Sudan, from Egypt. I mean, it was just a wonderful place at that time to see this interaction of students in a campus setting around this academic core. And at the same time, as that's going on, and I'm doing well in my studies, and I'm reading these books, and I'm being exposed to these weird people in Europe, like Sartre, this weird Frenchman, I'm thinking about what am I doing here in the US, and I'm being treated the way that I am. The naval military programs are fine, except that in those days, there was the quota. 2 black persons at Annapolis per year. At UCLA and the ROTC program, and the ROTC programs, 1 Negro per year. So it's like coming up in a framework where you know that your career is just sitting out there for you, just get your degree and right on into the service and all the wonderful pieces. But there it was, that barrier in place. I willingly accepted that. That was part of the deal. But as I learned more about what the world was about, I had problems. Read about Fanon, read about what's going on in the Middle East and what dynamic was going on in Africa. What am I doing here at home? So literally, I began to start off by doing the responsible Negro thing. I joined the campus NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And in the 1957 cycle, something magnificent happened in North Carolina. Students began to protest the fact that they couldn't go into coffee shops and department stores just adjacent to their campus and be served as customers, as regular customers. That was for white folks. Colored people had to stand off to the side or go to segregated seating. But the students in North Carolina sat in and began something extraordinary among students in primarily African-American colleges of the Southeast. They began to protest that second-class status in places of public accommodation. We were on fire at UCLA, those of us who were socially conscious in NAACP, to the point that we had to leave the NAACP because it's a national organization with structures and rules, and some of you know my colleagues, Robert and Helen Singleton. We gravitated towards the Congress of Racial Equality because it was a more open, a more active, a more centered organization in terms of facing the contradictions of our lives as students. And we participated. We began to do things in Westwood to attempt to open housing. Would you believe that at UCLA, on the student boards that listed housing availabilities in the community, job availabilities in the community, things were posted. But when Negro students would go to apply for the jobs or for the apartments or the rooms in the neighborhood, we would be turned away. So my colleagues began a program, and I joined in to say, if the university is going to post something, you have to tell people, these good folks in the neighborhood who are at least attentive to what's going on campus, that any student that comes out is going to have an opportunity to be there. In fact, you're going to desegregate that board. If folks can't let us come in, whoever we are, from wherever we are in the world, then lo and behold, you can't post it. Bingo, we won a victory. Then we began to do things off campus, emulating our friends from the South. We would sit in here, picketing there in Santa Monica and in Westwood itself. Really, once upon a time, we weren't welcome in Westwood. That's not the Westwood of today. But there were wonderful pizza places and little restaurants and little shops where we were really disinvited. And for those of us who were silly enough to go to the barber shops, or for the young women who went to the beauty shops in Westwood to get services, we didn't have it on campus at the time, they would do what you call pick your hair. They would show it by their practices that they couldn't cut black hair. And we had an action behind that. We got the support of some of the high-profile black athletes and foreign athletes on campus to also go down, and as they suffered the indignity, we got the attention and focus on campus. And lo and behold, people were made to be accountable to their state licenses. You have state license to be able to cut hair, to be a cosmetologist, and the city ordinances to go down and sell food and welcome people into your restaurants, and you must welcome everyone. And lo and behold, we began to feel emboldened by that. We were doing things and we were grabbing our turf that's supposed to be ours anyway. Once again, following the lead of our colleagues in the South, the sit-ins turned into something else because the students who lived in that southeastern United States used buses going back and forth home to college and universities. And they had another kind of segregation facing them. The Congress of Racial Equality sponsored a freedom ride. It was something that CORE had done once before World War II. But right about the late 1950s going into 60, it took on another kind of urgency. We had high expectations of the Kennedy administration. Requests were made to deal with the desegregation of interstate transportation and the facilities that served interstate transportation, the coffee shops, the waiting rooms, and most importantly, the toilets. And you know what? There was resistance up and down the line. And you know what? Folks decided to do something about it. And you all know the story of the Freedom Rides. It started off in Washington, D.C., and our young colleague, John Lewis, a student, was in that initial bus ride. He was part of the student participation in this particular core program. And the Freedom Rides were in essence stopped because buses were burned and people were beaten by thugs that local authorities let have access to us, to us, as they were involved in the transportation. So one of our courageous schoolmates, a lady by the name of Diane Nash, in Tennessee State, at Tennessee State University, who had been part of a group mentored by Dr. James Lawson, who was a very, very active and prominent activist in this community until this day, talked about principles of nonviolence, introducing us in many ways to the approaches taken by Gandhi and others in India as they sought their own independence. And lo and behold, Diane Nash sent out the call. We're not going to let the Freedom Rides stop. And the phones just rang across the United States as students had relationships with each other and peers doing things around civil rights issues. And we in Los Angeles, encouraged by the leadership of the Congress of Racial Equality here, began to participate in Freedom Rides, 8 in all, from Los Angeles during the summer of August 1961. I happened to be on the last one leaving Los Angeles in August. Expectation, you are going to agree that you're going to be nonviolent. You're going to agree that should you be confronted, cursed at, spit on, hit, kicked, you're going to do nothing. You're going to be nonviolent. We're going to show you how to protect yourself, to double up. Be careful and stay close to your peers, but do not fight back. We understood that going on. The training that was provided by Corps was very, very dramatic. And to cap it off, because there had been serious injuries along the way, we made out our wills. There's just a possibility you don't come back. And a number of us still proceeded to follow those rules, and we did those things. And we took trains to New Orleans, primarily, to ride up on trains interstate to Jackson, Mississippi, which evolved as the hub because the segregation in Mississippi were a particular type. They were so crazy and rabid that even Lyndon Johnson said that we in Texas are not like those crazies over there. On the record. While en route to New Orleans to mobilize to go up on the railroad to Jackson, Mississippi, and arrest, and to go to Parchman Prison to fill up the cells in the jail. Corps got a call from the Progressive Youth Association in Houston, Texas. Would you please have somebody stop here? Because in Houston, we're not getting any love. We're not getting any coverage of our demonstrations. We're not getting any coverage of our protests. And what I said about LBJ and his folks ran Texas. And the way they dealt with segregation, even though it was the same segregation, they did not do some of the crazy things that were done in Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama. We came in from out of state, and we allowed for there to be some small coverage in newspapers, on radio, and television. Because in Houston, all the dynamic activities of the students of Texas Southern University were basically eliminated from the press. It was simply not covered. So we provided a little bit of coverage, and Harris County provided shelter for me and about 20 of my colleagues for about 3 weeks at public expense in the Harris County Jail. It was a segregated experience: black males, white males, black females, white females. just so happened that in my troop, my group, the bulk of the whites who were there, men and women, were Jewish. The Jewish men put in with white men. The Jewish females in with white females. Black males, black males. Black females with black females. If you've never been in a jail situation, especially just a general population, you know that there's organization within the jail population. The black males were welcomed as heroes because the men who were there understood clearly why we got arrested. And they thought that we were doing something really great, allowing ourselves to be arrested and get this arrest record for doing nothing more than wanting to sit in at the coffee shop at the train station. So we were okay. Same with the black women. The white women had a little bit of a problem. The women who were running that particular tank had a conversation, and they ultimately decided not to do anything to them. The white males, they beat the men that were with us, the Jewish fellows that were there. And not only, I think, did they vent their rage because they were with us as freedom riders, I think they were also venting because they were Jewish. And they beat them bloody. And it was a result of the beating of those men that we were pulled out of the jail, because our goal was to go to jail, fill up the jails, cause pressures up and down the line, generate publicity, and make people like the Kennedy administration feel bad because they weren't enforcing federal laws that says that, you know, we should have freedom of movement in these United States. But the blood that they spilled was not in vain. It helped generate more publicity. And it contributed to the pressures that were building up on the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, and his brother, JFK, that while we were in jail, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which up to that point, the President and the Attorney General basically said, well, they're the ones who make the decisions about what happens in transportation interstate. They basically moved, and there were instructions given politically to the Interstate Commerce Commission, I would like to assert, because all of a sudden they pulled in the people who have responsibilities for transportation in the United States. Trains, buses, airlines, and they basically said, you're going to desegregate. And lo and behold, it happened. And it was a wonderful feeling because we students, inside of 1 year, delivered a major American victory. You started out 61 with opposition of the Kennedy administration to what we were doing. If anything, they wanted to buffer it and somehow not be bothered with it. But lo and behold, we persisted. The pressures built, and it got to the place where they did their political thing. I've always wondered who delivered the message. Did the president say, Bobby Kennedy, go get him? Did Bobby Kennedy go out there in the way that we've come to know and love and respect him back in the days when he was Attorney General? Did he go in there and just tell his commissioners, go do it, bring them in, tell them it's over? Anyway, it happened. And inside of a year, those of us who were just student activists, feeling good about the victories we were able to win in the campus community, were part of a national movement that won something. We won something. Anyway, yours truly picked up what's called a strike for the folks who are in South Los Angeles who are aware of that. You get arrested for something, you get a strike. And back in the early 1960s, the public employment situation, the city and the county, had these nice little forms, and at the bottom, have you ever been arrested? There's a little box. I checked the box. And as my UCLA graduate, not the graduate, my bachelor's degree was in my hands, I thought I was going to be able to get the lowest hanging fruit job that was available to college graduates at the time. DPSS and probation department, Los Angeles County. I got called to the side. you check the box. Why you check the box? I said, well, I was arrested for unlawful assembly. What do I mean? I said, well, I was a freedom rider. I went to jail. Hey, we really do want to reach out and employ Negroes in county service, but you're not the kind of Negro we want. Once upon a time, people would say that to you, straight to your face. You're not the kind of Negro we want. We don't want no new Negroes coming in here, because first thing you know, you're going to get out here and you're going to start doing some organizing, and we just, yeah, ain't going to work. Shocked. I then fell back on something that had inspired me while I was in jail. I read a black newspaper for those weeks that I was in jail, and I took it to heart. It's the Forward Times newspaper in Houston, Texas. It's still being published. And I said that in LA, I'm going to find which newspapers are around that I can go and see about getting a job. Lo and behold, the civil rights attorney of record in LA was a gentleman by the name of Loren Miller. And Loren Miller was the publisher of the historic California Eagle newspaper. I got a job, thanks to Loren Miller, thanks to his executive editor, a lady by the name of Grace Simons. And for those of you who are fans of civic activism in the Los Angeles area, when you think of Elysian Park, there's a facility there named for a lady by the name of Grace Simons, who mobilized the community to make sure that Elysian Park was maintained in a way that it worked for the people who lived around Elysian Park. So even as I got my opportunity to come into the newspaper world, I came in under the leadership of activists who had been out there doing things, and the expectation was that I, as a freedom rider kind of a guy, I would go and do my business on behalf of the newspaper, looking for things like that, opportunities to be of community service. It's just that the pay was horrible. Loren Miller's cousin, Leon Washington, had a newspaper called the Los Angeles Sentinel. Leon Washington paid more money, so I thank Loren Miller and Grace Simons for the opportunity to be at the Eagle, and I went to work for the Sentinel down on Central Avenue. And there I had the opportunity as a reporter to go cover activities at City Hall from 1962 into 1963. And I was there to see the build-up to the great activities of 1963 when Tom Bradley was elected in the 10th District, Gilbert Lindsay was appointed in the 9th District, and Billy Mills was elected in the 8th District. In 1963, from nothing to 3 elected officials on the Los Angeles City Council. The numbers are the same today, but you could just imagine what it was like then, because City Hall, its employment, its services were not as you might see today in terms of diversity, things pretty much being, well, even though there are 15 members of the City Council, it's a matter of advocacy whether you get more or less out of the shared city pot. It was still new. Would you believe that once upon a time that the colored people working at City Hall were the girls who ran the elevators back in the days when elevators had those, you know? And would you ever believe that my great colleague, Gilbert Lindsay, was once a janitor at City Hall? A janitor. And he had a little office down in one of those basements. And Gil would always remind us that that's where he started. So you can imagine the pride I had to just be around this dynamic place called City Hall and see what was going on at that particular moment in time. That particular moment in time. So as I was there, I began to meet people who were involved in the politics of the city and the dynamics that were going on as South Los Angeles was changing. And I hope that when Janice Hahn speaks about the extraordinary service of her family in those 70 years, we'll all be able to learn more about the stands that they took and the kind of stresses that they had to face in a South Los Angeles that was rapidly changing prior to, during, and post-World War II, when the white population moved out like that, and the Negro population sucked up to space. Those were the days of racial restrictions. And the Hans were among the strong people who were just good people. That's why there was such a love and affection for Kenny Hahn for so many years in South LA. But that's for another event. I wanted to just reference that because part of my story is tied in with the fact that there were good people in South LA who did not see us coming in as being a threat to their survival. Even though in certain parts of South Los Angeles, when black people moved in on a particular block, crosses were burned. I have a colleague who's here today who, in thinking about a high school that was a really great high school called Fremont, there were effigies of black people being strung up on trees at Fremont High School. Would you believe that? Well, those were the times. The thing that turned me on so much to the dynamics of what was happening at the newspaper was that we were beginning to cover the politics. And the dynamic of politics in the Democratic Party was such that there was an opening up of everyone in town. Built on the experiences of Ed Roybal in his being elected in the 9th District many, many years ago, as many of you know who know the history of the city of LA, there was a beginning to see a surge of that around what was happening in the 10th District that was going through its own process of integration at the time. And some extraordinary coalitions came together. That coalition that put Roybal in its first outing rose again, and it supported Tom Bradley as he was elected in the 10th District. In the 8th District, a seat that was held by Kenny Hahn succeeded when he went to the Board of Supervisors by his brother Gordon. The competition was primarily among black people, black men. And Attorney Billy Mills won the seat, 8th District. All of this took place in 1 year. This magnificent activity of change that was supported by the presence of the Hans in South LA that made that thing kind of possible. The extraordinary work done in the coalition that existed at the time of people who had really been pushed down and suppressed in this city, rising up. First, as they did it with Roybal, it was done again with Tom Bradley as councilman, and again when he ran for mayor, and then Billy Mills. And as I had some writing skills, I was there with the newspaper, and as I was around City Hall, lo and behold, when Billy Mills was looking to his staff, he wanted to have someone to be able to handle the media. And there I happened to be. So that's how I basically got on the staff of Billy Mills in 1964. And it was City Hall life and City Hall politics from 64 all the way in to 1991. Tough times, exciting times, but I wouldn't share it. I wouldn't have anything else. I'd love to have this opportunity to share it because the story of South LA and its politics and its people have yet to be written. I'm just so sorry that during my time at City Hall, we did not have the kind of newspaper coverage in the LA Times that you would find in New York or in Chicago or in Philadelphia, where local media coverage really meant local media coverage, where people would come out and tell the stories about the whole city and the politics of the whole city. It was though the Times just watched what happened in the Valley and downtown, and we in South LA were just out there. But there was so much dynamic and active that's going on there that I hope to just address a little bit later. But that's it. You got a little clip up here, and you saw the kind of a fellow that I was on the city council. I'm pleased that I had the opportunity to be myself. That was one of the freedoms that I got out of that exposure to Fanon. It made it part of my life early on, so that when the change came and the dynamics of our community really began to move and we began to see ourselves differently and to sort of capsulate what people said, rise of black power. Well, what we were doing was we were just asserting ourselves. We had our numbers and we were affecting our politics. And in the 8th District, when Billy Mills was named judge, I happened to be one of the fellows out there competing, and there was competition. I happened to be one of the fellows out there that was competing, they got the tap on the shoulder from Tom Bradley, and I represented that faction, and were fortunate enough to win. And that's what happened in the beginning at City Hall. And then the rest of it, in part, that you saw. I was one of the people, not so much leading, but following Zev Yaroslavsky and others when they held Darrell Gates to task. Darrell Gates, as you all know, was the epitome of what LAPD prided itself on being in the tradition of Bill Parker, which meant that they suppressed us. I got to tell you, there was one period in the city council I almost cried because a commissioner chose not to let me know what was going on. It was the late Sam Williams, who was Tom Bradley's choice to head the police commission, and they had just done the investigation on the police disorder and intelligence division files. And I just wanted to know, as the commissioner was telling me about what was happening in the briefing, man, let me know. Who were the people out there? PDID was doing all this work. Remember, once upon a time, all police officers were like 6 feet, tall people, muscular people. They're all white males. I wanted to know how the heck they were getting information. You could see white people, police officers, coming a mile away. You can see white people looking all young and healthy, coming around, socializing in South LA. Immediately, what are you doing here? You know he's not living in the neighborhood. That meant that there were people in the community who were collaborating with PDID and the police department. And they caused us damage, and they hurt us. And to put it this way, as the Lord would bless us, when those twin scourges of guns and cocaine from Central America came to South LA, guess who got caught flat-footed? The vaunted intelligence of the police department, they missed, and the sheriff's department, they missed the fact that the guns were coming. They missed the fact that the drugs were coming. A fellow by the name of Ollie North was manipulating that crap. And you know what? For some of us, it's like saying, I'm in there. We thought the LAPD was so omniscient. These guys got caught flat-footed. And Sheriff Sherman Block, even his, and my colleague at the time, Maxine Waters, took Sherman Block to task. What was the Sheriff's Intelligence Department doing? When did you know it was going on? And when you did find out, why didn't you let us know? But that was part of a pattern that we still find residual in South LA today, unfortunately. And it's ironic that it's not on my watch, it's coming up right now, that even as we talk about getting into this new industry that's being legalized, having to do with cannabis and the rest of it, one of the things that's included in the development of the new industry is to help compensate for people who were injured during that war on drugs that caused so many men and women in South LA and East LA to wind up in social situations that are just horrible as a result of the police and the dynamics of gangs fighting over control of illegal drugs that law enforcement ostensibly didn't know about, so they couldn't do anything to control it. But that's part of the fun. The greatest enjoyment I had was, as shown in the clip from Bishop Tutu and Mandela. I'd like to just confess it. I used the city of LA's money and its resources on behalf of what I believed was right for me and my people. I did everything I could to help SWAPO. I did everything I could to help the ANC. I did everything I could, and I think it may show up a little later, but every kind of person who was involved in our liberation movement who passed through town, I had a reason to give them a citation or a resolution to get them some publicity. I participated in a group called Trans-Africa. I raised money, and even though I wasn't a large money raiser, based on the reporting at City Hall for my own political accounts, what I raised with my friends, I sure did spend helping people in other places. I'm pleased to say so now, because I wouldn't want one to believe that Bob Farrell's records showing that he wasn't raising any money as a member of the city council. How could he be there? That he was not naive and he was doing what he was supposed to do in his heart. And that was to be representative of my community on issues that were national and international that meant a lot to us. So perhaps with that, Mike, we could just sort of go into other aspects of my time, my perspectives on the city, the zoning, the development, that special place called the University of Southern California, which is still producing good things for us in South LA and wherever else you want to take it. Thank you all very much.
Hey, Bob, thanks for the nice warm-up. You doing okay?
I'm fine.
All right, wonderful. As a matter of fact, you just ended on that, and the first actual little thing on my list here is the audio clip that that we played with Tutu on that phone-in. I kind of want you to kind of put us in that room. Now, the video clips showed the microphone and the little podium in the middle near the horseshoe, and that's where someone would stand up from the public to either make a public announcement, or as you were doing with Mr. Zumberg, you were presenting a resolution. Now, that was when Bradley came down to the council meeting and made his impassioned speech to you guys. That's where he was standing, right?
That's where he was standing.
Okay. And now, when they were trying to get the phone call patched through, where was all that taking place? I mean, was Zev at his spot on the horseshoe
Yes.
trying to communicate, and were you at your spot trying to communicate also?
Yes.
Okay.
Through the magic of people like the gentleman upstairs there with the bank of electronics. Remember, we had the little room behind City Council where some of that was taking place?
Yeah.
We had a person monitoring the volume at the speakers' podiums, at our seats, and he was flicking things back and forth and doing those technical things in the back, just as we're having technical things done in the back today. But it was something, our city has been very good in that, and as I had shared with you, I'm amazed that I can follow my entire political career at City Hall by checking out what we by policy have in our archives. Either the sound, or once we got to the place where we were having the video coverage, the video.
Yeah, it was nice that you were still there when they started doing the video broadcast, because now we've got some nice, some nice video clips.
Yeah.
Whose idea was it to call Tutu and bring him in on that particular meeting? Was that yours or Zev's or whose?
Well, let's just say it was a collective activity.
Okay.
One of the beautiful things that I'd like you to know about the City Council is even though men and women come from 15 different places.
Hold your mic closer.
Oh, hold him up closer.
Thank you. Even though we come from 15 districts that comprise the city, we do collaborate in assisting our colleagues around things that sometimes transcend our local concerns about the division of funds and allocation of resources, personnel, programs. We tend to come together, and I hope that it's still the spirit on the City Council, when there are things that are a little bit bigger than just our city politics. And my colleagues recognize that, especially John Farrell, the president, and Pat Russell before him, that I was going to be raising a particular kind of issue, and it was a matter of council courtesy. And likewise, if you know the history of Zev Yaroslavsky, his stand on behalf of Soviet Jewry, there was a kind of a consideration that when issues like this came up, colleagues would allow colleagues to speak to those issues because we knew it was important to members of the City Council, and in large part, it's part of how some of us got to the city council in the first place. So it was a kind of a camaraderie that was engendered by the leadership of Farrell. And I think you find that with Herb Wesson, and I think Garcetti before him, those council presidents have developed that as a skill that's pretty much taken for granted as to how the council president is elected. Because you got 14 votes you got to pick up plus your own. And how those patterns, how the discernment works in terms of saying, hey, you know, that's something that's kind of transcendent. Hey, but hey, you're just going for an extra slice, an extra bite of the pie. Those are distinctions that many times are missed when the dynamics of the city council is demonstrated. And once again, we're shortchanged because we don't have the media coverage at City Hall, where you have men and women who know what city politics is like, so they can give you a sense of flavor each time the council is meeting, when the issues come up, when certain people have the opportunity to speak a little bit longer than some other people, the dynamics of the council itself. It's mixed because, once again, it really hasn't developed as a media art form for people who cover politics in Los Angeles. The way it is, as I said, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, back east, I think there's more of appreciation of the local media and what happens at places at City Hall, and they're aware that personality means something.
Now, well, Ferraro's maxim was that there were always 8 votes on everything. And so everyone getting their little slice, they took into consideration that, okay, we're gonna support you on this one, but I want the support when that time comes on whatever my particular issue was. I'm guessing that was the dynamic that Farrell, he wanted things to move. I mean, it seemed that there was a certain momentum that he wanted the council to do, and a lot of times today, it seems that all of the discussion, all of the heavy lifting is done in committee. And then by the time it gets to the council floor, outside of the public input, it's all pretty much decided that everyone is going to support everybody else. At least that's one of the criticisms that I've heard. You had mentioned at one point in the past that back then everyone had a chance to speak their minds in open council because they didn't really know each other very well either in committee or out of committee, and so it was more public airing at in the chambers.
I'm really saddened that, based on what you saw on the video, that we have a city council now that will allow someone to have a public comment of a minute. That's outrageous.
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
That's outrageous. For the reasons I stated then.
Yeah.
If you don't let people speak, they lose confidence in the work that you do. They lose confidence in the decisions that you take. And you're not allowing them to do what they're down there to do. They have to travel from long distances, many instances, to come for their few moments before the city council. Why not let them speak and express themselves fully? And if they do weird things, people have a right, free speech in the United States. And besides, they're not going to be there that long. And we're paid full time, so what does it mean if we're going to be there? We're going to be there until the agenda is finished and the president says it's over. So what's the issue? And I think that that's more a reflection of past city councils whose members have come from the legislature, where the rules are different, where things are done in committee, you work it out, and then you bring it on down and you do the vote. Our system during my era was one of, it's every day. You may or may not have your votes. You may or may not have your constituents. If you need to have it in a way that's important to you and you want to make sure that people in your community have a say, you ask and have the issue continue. And the courtesy is, if you stand to ask for it to be continued, the courtesy is that it's done. And then there's interaction among the members. But there's just a different discipline that the men and women on the, some of the men and women on the council follow and are comfortable with, and that's primarily the folks who've been members of the legislature. That's why you see the Assembly President Herb Wesson do so well as president of the Los Angeles City Council, and people, former colleagues or people who grew up in that particular system, and that's the way it seems to be going now. Is it good or bad? It is a system, and it works. Or does it? I don't think that it would have been necessarily comfortable for those of us who were in the council back in the 20th century. How about that? You see? Back in the 20th century. Yeah, way back in the 20th century. But I think that as the city's grown, as issues become more complex, there's more of an emphasis on people wanting to do public policy development and implementation rather than having just an open conversation about the politics. So much is covered up when we want to discuss the public policy and we have to do these different kind of things. What about the situation where something comes up and someone just comes to talk to you about an issue that's important or something that they believe is critical for the city, and you don't send them out. We did not send people out, I believe, to say, now you go out and you put together a public policy statement and bring it back to me and my staff, and I'll do a public policy review. We discussed things among ourselves. We discussed things with our council staff. We had the legislative analysts. We had the CAO. And it went into that great machine, which is how decisions are made in the Los Angeles City Council, with the input and the collaboration of the mayor, given his responsibilities, and we did the business of the city. It looked like making sausage. It was making sausage. And some people didn't like that. Okay, so you don't see the public making sausage anymore. Go to committee and it's done differently. It's prepackaged. That's a prepackaged. I didn't say that, Herb. That was just an example, Herb.
Reflecting back on something else that you mentioned, you were with the Sentinel. You were hanging around City Hall, covering what was going on there, and so you saw some of those developments in '62, '63. Do you remember the scene when you found out about Gilbert Lindsay being appointed to fill Roy Ball's seat in the 9th?
City politics at its best. How did Kenny Hahn pull that off? Gilbert Lindsay was a deputy to Kenneth Hahn. And that was a big thing, because prior to Kenny Hahn, there were no black staffers, really, at the supervisors who had any clout. They were people who were drivers. They would drive a car. They would be minor staff members. But with Gilbert Lindsay, Gilbert was an integral part of the Hahn machine and the operation. He was there as a political. There's a difference between people who are there as you have a representative staff and those who are there because they do effective things on behalf of the incumbent. And Gilbert Lindsay absolutely did that. So for whatever reasons, and once again, we lack the story because the coverage at City Hall has been so atrocious in terms of really getting into the city council stuff. How could Kenny Hahn and Sam Yorty marshal the 8 votes to get a decision made to fill the vacancy in the 9th district, given the success of Mr. Roybal being elected to Congress, rather than let that go to an election in the district? Well, you know, we have ways of doing things. In the city of LA, you get to be a member of the city council by election, or the body appoints members when there are vacancies. It's not used often, but it's there. It's there apparently for a reason historically. I don't know why historically the charter allowed for that, but it did. Remember, the council used to meet 5 days a week. We met 5 days a week. Why did the Los Angeles City Council meet 5 days a week? Because historically, in the development of Los Angeles in the 20th century, the City Council was there to take actions that were required to be supportive of development. Remember, we have these extraordinary agencies of the City of LA, the Department of Water and Power, especially as it relates to the dynamics going around the San Fernando Valley and beyond. And I'd like to suggest it's always been friendly to development, and I'd like to suggest that that pattern developed back in the days of Norris Polson and those folks, when there was a different dynamic. We just come out of World War II. The agricultural activities in the San Fernando Valley collapsed. Same thing in South LA, where people were growing barley. All of that collapsed with the expedition about World War II. Land was required to do war-related activities. Mm-hmm. Land was required for all these people coming from all over the United States with different skill sets and whatever. They needed housing, and lo and behold, there was a market for it. I'd like to suggest that it's in that area you will find out why some of the practices that take place in the City Council and our rules exist. They derive from a practice. It wasn't logical, rational, public policy. This is what the mayor does. This is what the members of the City Council do. The elected officials pretty much do what they have the courage to do. And we have the city attorneys to make sure that you don't do anything illegal. And then there was a period when, just prior to the legislative analysts, the council felt that it wanted to have its own resource, not wanting to depend on the city attorney and the CAO, the city administrative officer. So they created a thing called the legislative analyst, so we could have additional lawyers and financial people check with the interests of the city council at stake, as opposed to just following the lead of the mayor and the city attorney and the CAO.
So it was another check and balance, in other words, perhaps.
I think that's a nice way to put it. No, I'm a person who came out of my institution. I don't reflect values of persons who've been through civil service to become people who are employees, the department heads, people who are accountable to the city administrative officer. I did not develop that way. Mine was a political development. And I think the mix has been serving the city of Los Angeles very well. It works for us in our big city. In other parts of the United States, there have been some terrible abuses to that. I don't think we do that in Los Angeles. We have our little minor things, but you don't hear about major corruption in departments where people do favors and someone gets to be appointed because they got whatever. No, this is a good California open government system. See, he has a checkoff list.
I do. We've had a series of lunches, and so I've taken notes and figured, okay, talk about this, about this, about this, about this, and so you've covered quite a bit of them already. So, but you know what? There have been those occasions when you said, oh, I want to be able to say a word or two about such and such, and so on my people to ask about David Cunningham, who we just lost recently.
An ally. David Cunningham was a young man who, like me, was active in politics, wanted to make a difference, and his champion was Tom Bradley. So when Tom Bradley was elected in the 10th district, he was Tom Bradley's choice to succeed him. And once again, remember, these are the 70s. Things are very competitive. We're at a point where we're in a more open situation in terms of minority participation. And there were many, many men and women seeing the possibilities to participate in the 1970s that really was not there in the manifest way in the 1960s and the 1950s. Our generation stood up and we wanted to participate. And there were a lot of us out there from a lot of backgrounds and a lot of traditions and business and unions and the rest who wanted to be part of that. And Dave Cunningham was Tom Bradley's choice. And he went in the 10th district. And I'm glad that as I had had some experience as deputy to Councilman Billy Mills, that Tom Bradley, once Billy Mills was named judge, superior judge, saw fit to tap me on the shoulders. The competition was very intense. A lot of people in South LA wanted to be members of the city council, men and women. And the competition was heavy.
You'd also told me at one point in time that being a field deputy was relatively new when you came on with Mills. And so, in other words, there weren't very many field deputies at the time anywhere? And
Right.
what did you do as a result of that?
I think a gentleman by the name of Willard Murray is an absolute political wizard. Willard Murray was field deputy to Councilman Billy Mills back in the day when the field deputies won each council person, an executive secretary, an assistant to the executive secretary, and a clerk. And that's all the city council had. But with the rise of Mills and Bradley and Lindsay and the wizard Willard Murray, there began a conversation with the council deputies such as, well, you know, city's growing. We need to have some more staff. Well, look, why don't we just have, you know, each of us get an additional staff person, and because all of us are coming down to City Hall, then what we need to do is have a district office. So what we're going to do is we're going to get an additional deputy, and we're going to get a district office, and you have staff out of the district office to better serve constituents. And lo and behold, more than 8 votes were available, and lo and behold, it began to show up. And now, if you look at the staff of the council members, they're rather large, and they're very, very well paid, and they're men and women who have some rather unique specialties. Public policy, finance, the alphabet of what's required to do business in the municipal context today. You will find those men and women on city council staff. Lawyers who choose to participate in the process if they're tapped by a council person. So that, in a way, each council office is kind of like a mini CLA in itself. And I think it's a beautiful exercise in public participation, in having the elected official have as competent and capable insights and advice that that person can get to best represent his or her constituency.
And was that your experience with your field office and your field deputies and the support staff that you had?
Absolutely. And whenever back in the 70s and 80s that there were opportunities with a variety of federal programs to have additional staff, we on the council did our fair share by assisting and hiring 15 to 30 additional people by saying that we wanted to maintain liaison with people who were doing these federally funded activities and to watch out for the interests of our council members. I tell you, Los Angeles is a testing ground for approaches and techniques as it relates to governance and citizen participation. And this is before the rise of the charter change that brought in the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the neighborhood councils. Another brilliant stroke. let the people participate. Now, I'm sort of being facetious. Let the folks participate. They want to get involved, and by gosh, make sure they have some money. Because a very human thing is going to take place in the neighborhood councils, is they not only have an opportunity to respond and comment on issues and make recommendations to the city council in a special way and have a budget to begin to do some of these things. As you heard in my presentation, my approach was, back in that day, that the Brown Act required that there be the public participation. I thought it was great. Let people come down and take their time and express themselves to do things. Now, the neighborhood council people can weigh in on the issues all around the city, and they have even a little special designation that they can send and make a comment on a file. But as you say, you know, you only have 2 minutes there when you do get downtown. So it's like still an experiment in governance in this big city of ours, which is still essentially nonpartisan local government given the California model. And it's exciting to see. And it's more exciting if you're the council person or councilwoman having the opportunity to have someplace between 10 and maybe by extension to programs where you have additional people come in, 10 to 20, 25 people reporting to you.
There's a couple of other questions that I'll intersperse, but one of them, and it goes back to that one clip with Jim Zumberg.
Yes.
And towards the end of your comments, you mentioned to him that that his successor was going to have some pretty big shoes to fill.
Yes.
When you left council and Mark Ridley Thomas eventually became the new councilperson, what shoes did he have to fill, and how do you think he did, considering what was going on? I mean, just set the context. March 1991, the Rodney King beating took place. And so by the time anything really got going outside the first, for the first couple of meetings that, Daryl Gates came down and addressed the council, and then, you were gone. You were away from that.
Yeah.
And so then it became someone else to represent the 8th District and express the frustration of the community. So while you were not there, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? And how do you think Ridley Thomas did in following after you?
Well, he did superb. A different generation, different perspective on governance, still informed by that same civil rights, the advocacy that comes out of the movement, but more refined. Mark Ridley Thomas' PhD. The men and women who came into public office, into the public process, starting about 1980, were people who did that. Remember, I came in as a freedom rider activist on the street, and that was less a matter of my academic preparation, because I'm over here in Near East Studies. How do I get down here at City Hall? It was more a matter of my people skills, being in the right place at the right time, and being active politically. By the time Mark Ridley Thomas came along, that opportunity for easy access to participation in the political governance, being part of that crowd, became more difficult. More difficult because the requirements of fundraising were increased. The absolute obligation of someone who runs for office to have a base before they start. I mean, in my day, you could literally go out there on your own to get recognition by the city council person that's there, other political folks as we develop factions, the folks, the Cranston folks, the Council of Democratic Clubs, things like that, or Democratic clubs. But today, it's a different operation. You really have to be prepared to invest time, money, develop the expertise to even get in a room these days. It's a different situation. And what Mark Ridley Thomas had to face was the same thing we faced post-Watts 1965. the failure of the police department to protect the people in the city of LA. They screwed up. When the moment of crisis came, they blinked. For whatever reasons, at 77th Division, which had such a tradition in LAPD of being out there, going out to battle, you know, with the urban folks, man, they couldn't even deal with what was happening. With people at an intersection throwing rocks that you could see on television. Rather than that being contained, for whatever reason, there was a delay in the folks in 77th doing their job. And as a result, we have magnificent streets in Los Angeles. They run north, south, east, and west. And the disruption went all the way up to Koreatown. Did it need to go all the way up to Koreatown? To the best of my knowledge, folks haven't begun to ask those kinds of questions. Because what will happen, and get back to, you got to be critical of the police department. Just as I was when Zev was raising the issue about holding Darrell Gates accountable, because officers were there and the money was going to be paid by the city of LA for the actions of officers that had been found to be not nice in the court. People won in judgment. And what do? Should we just basically stand there and constantly pay these judgments when here's a guy who represents so much in terms of police leadership, so much in tradition, and he doesn't discipline his guys? That stuff's going on now. Well, let's just say I've had a chance to live long enough to see a fellow resign because the people who were involved in Black Lives Matter and others who got tired of just having black people get killed in South LA with non-accountability, with their constant pressure, with their demonstrations, with their special actions, they brought him down. Folks will say, well, the police chief just chose to retire, you know, he's sort of getting up in age and time to do it. We believe in the community of activists in which I participate, that as a result of Black Lives Matter and the demonstrations before the police commissions, the demands for accountability, that he simply was not able to handle it. Now, that's an opinion. And once again, someplace in there, there's a point in which the great LAPD, for all the good that they do, they choke. Where you have a screw up like at the Ramparts Division years ago, where you have men and women out there who are doing a job in law enforcement, then you find out that, you know, you want to talk about where the thugs are. The thugs are in the law enforcement area. They're police officers in what happened in Rampart. And then this horrible thing that happened with the sheriffs. These people are horrible inside the jail. And folks know about it, and they can't stop that. Are you kidding me? The political will is not there. Well, now I'm going to say something, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. That's because the people who are in those situations are black, bloody brown. What do you think would happen in this town if police officers were shooting white kids? What would happen in this town if the police department wound up shooting Jewish kids over on the west side, where in respect to the way we have our own religious liberties here, there's this extraordinary opportunity for the practice of faith, where people who are of Jewish persuasion, some who are very orthodox, literally have their walking at a particular time, that is the way they celebrate their faith. What would happen if a bunch of those folks got shot because someone was walking down the street and the police officer says, well, he looked like he pulled something out of the bag. A man's walking out there with his family and somebody said they saw something. Or somebody drove by and we wanted to just see what they had in their pocket. Come on. They look funny. Come to South LA and some parts of East LA, what more is there going on than people doing whatever they do? Got problems all over, but why is that distinction out here? Why do we have deadly force? Because that was the same back with Darrell Gates. The Eula Love situation. The woman gets frustrated around a gas meter reader or something, and she throws a knife, all frustrated. The guys don't duck and just say, lady, cool down. She threw a knife. Bam! Take her out.
Well, that happened in your district, didn't it? Because I know that you did some TV appearances taking issue with what the official story was at that particular time.
And the way you had the clip, I'm speaking and Darrell Gates is sitting right there. I will never believe that police chiefs cannot hold their men accountable to them and what they say when they mean it. Bratton showed that another kind of a chief brought in by political decision makers could influence this vaunted tradition of LAPD, and the men and women still do their jobs. And you don't have this record associated with Bratton of that many people getting shot. Well, what's that all about? And these are the contradictions that are there, and here we are as contemporary and great a city as we are. These things still pop up, and they make a mockery of all the good things that happen in the city of LA. The extraordinary things that are happening as we do transit. The extraordinary things that are happening out around LAX as we respond to this demand of people to use air travel and to come this way. There's so much to be proud of the way our system works, but it's these things where lives are lost when it doesn't work that the dark side comes out. I mean, there's a whole genre of movies that are out here dealing with, in whole or part, fictions and fantasies based on the real world. Do our police, if I want to go, do our police have such fear of people that they will shoot first and shoot to kill rather than say, hey, you know what? Here's a guy, this is a kid. I can take that kid out. I'm a police officer, I'm trained, I have martial arts and all this kind of stuff. I'm professionally steady. I can take out an unskilled person out here who's just jumping up in emotion. Now, I may have to take a punch or two to the head. You can't take a punch if you're a police officer. Or you get a feeling about that. If in doubt, shoot. Do something other than engage the person. We don't have police officers, and I mean this to just be descriptive. When I first came around, police officers would carry a little sap, which meant that they were prepared to engage somebody and smack them with something and keep on. They did not take their lives. And we would think that that was kind of rough. But they did not take their lives. And the weapons that the police officers use today, these are automatic pistols. These are not pistols like your six-shooter. You think images of the movies, bam, 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 bam. These are things that are rapid fire. Come on. We can't do better than that. I'd like to assert that we can, but then it gets all emotion. It's tied in with the extraordinary deference that we give to the police officers and their unions. Rightfully so, to me, wages and benefits, because they do stressful work and it's risky and the rest of it. But to give them, starting off by giving them the benefit of the doubt, as opposed to the citizen out in the street, or the person out in the street, citizenship notwithstanding. Just, why not just say the citizen is the one who one must listen to first and hear that story, as opposed to, well, we're going to just wait for the police report to be done and then we'll see whether it's credible or not. Do you have any idea what happens when police reports are submitted to a bureaucratic process? Starting off from the officers, the watch folks who oversee them. When it is written up, it goes to a division, and ultimately it comes down to Parker Center. And then after all of that, it comes into the city council purview. How many hands are on top of that paper? And then, ultimately taxpayers pay for it. How much have we paid for settlements? I mean, that was only $200,000 back there. That's kind of the dark side of our great city and our administration. But we still do okay. There are other places in the world where a lot more people would be killed by law enforcement and security people simply because that's the nature of those societies. We don't have that. We don't have that kind of activity going on. But we sure do, we are certainly aware of national patterns, which seems to be ingrained into the very nature of policing in the United States, given what we understand is the history of police officers being on the streets in the United States in the first place. That they are there in part to not only protect the public, but to suppress certain parts of the public. It's a strongly held feeling. And the body count attests to it.
Well, then there's also the argument that, you know, they're not equipped to do mental health services, and that's something that they're being asked to do on a growing basis. And they freely admit, this is not what we do. We don't know how to do this. Why are you making us do this? I actually saw part of a tape that Gates actually gave to a bunch of officers not too long after the Eula Love shooting. And basically what he said was, look, if these guys had any, and you didn't use it quite the same language, but basically if they had any understanding of mental illness or whatever he chose to call it, they wouldn't have done what they did. I mean, any foot officer could tell this was bad. This was a bad deal. You know, if they had any inkling of how to deal with, with someone who had some sort of issue, and that recurs. That comes back again, just to what you said, and just like so many things we saw in the clips, the homelessness issue, which is getting new attention. It's actually getting a new source of money now, and some of the other things that you were, taking, radical advocacy. Those sorts of things. It's part of a cycle, which I'm not excusing, but at the same time, it's just interesting that it's there. There's maybe it's called something new. It's got maybe a new wrinkle, but underneath it, it's still the same base formula that that we need to work with, that we need to fix.
Well, hopefully the dynamics around homelessness that have been taken in initiatives led by Mayor Garcetti will break a pattern that has been disturbing to me. With the homelessness problem addressed with two additional money sources, the money for housing and the money for social services, you find that there are teams of people who go out to deal with the homeless in structured and organized ways. When these moments come up, right, law enforcement, that's your job. Law enforcement has a role in dealing with the homeless, but it's not just law enforcement. They're there with people who have skills in dealing with mentally challenged people. They have people with other kinds of skills, so that the law enforcement person is there for the protection of that homeless person as well as the other people on these teams that go out. That might be a nice model for doing basic policing too, if it can reduce the number of people who get killed, because it's not only people getting killed and they're lost, but can you imagine the amount of money that we're paying out of the city treasury when we go and lose these cases? Can you imagine the amount of time that's lost on the LAPD side as they go through whatever the internals that they do when there's been an officer-involved shooting? Well, would it not be more efficient to look at what's showing up finally adopted into political and our organizational policy in dealing with the homeless, to have teams of people going out, so that in areas where you have the certainty of mentally challenged people out in the area, don't just go out there policing and looking for the crime, and don't depend on law enforcement people to be the first response. Put people in teams with some professionals out there to work with them. Can our guys work well in teams? One of the great things about our emergency services in LA City, LA County, is that we have fantastic intergovernmental cooperation, that law enforcement people in fire, the highway patrol, all of those folks, through mutual aid agreements, trainings, and other kinds of activities, they show that that model can work. Then why can't we have that to just deal with this thing called law enforcement? It's a start, and perhaps this will be a way to show that there is an efficiency that comes out of using these teams to deal with challenging populations, or in certain parts of the city where that kind of patrol is appropriate to protect lives and property. I mean that. Yeah. It's another way of looking at it. Or it's going to cost money. Good. You know what happened with Garcetti, the guys, this time? They went to the public to say, for us to do this with homeless people, we got to put more on a property tax, and we got to get you on the sales tax. Will you please do that? And you know what? People responded and made the money available. Mm-hmm. What if it was put on the ballot? Something akin to that with the goal of minimizing the loss of life at the hands of law enforcement. Might people vote for something like that? Might there be civil support and other ways that people would want to do some kind of involvement? One thing that came out of our experience in South LA after Watts, we had the community alert patrols, not only in LA but in other cities, where you had civic activists driving around watching the police do their jobs, pretty much as a citizen observer of law enforcement people to make sure that they were doing the jobs the way they were supposed to do the job, were not being abusive. But that was primarily a volunteer piece. But it served its point. It shows that someone or some entity needs to be out there to not only protect the public, but to protect the reputation of the department. Because one thing for sure, when the officers are sent out there, they may have supervisors go out and check them, but they don't necessarily see what their officers are doing. One thing about citizen patrols and the rest of them is people from the community are just watching what the officers are doing. And none of the civil involvement is getting in the way, as I understand it, of police officers doing their work, what they're supposed to be doing. It's just there because we're watching to see that things are done properly. What we understand, and we believe that the officers understand, is policy. You know? Mm-hmm. Is it okay to really jack up people? Once again, I have to go back to this thing about race and culture. I think if more white people were jacked up, the way black people and Latinos were jacked up, and you know what I mean by the term jacked up, okay, I think there would be a response that would shake City Hall, because people on the west side in the San Fernando Valley would not take it. But it's okay. It's okay as long as it happens with us. Officers and those who are responsible for their conduct are not held accountable for that stuff being done. When you hear of a watch commander getting docked because men and women under his or her control did some things out of policy, and there was a loss of life or some other thing that caused people in the neighborhood to lose confidence in the police?
I don't think I have.
So it's only the folks who are out there on the street, the grunts, who get the brunt of the stuff, right? And we have this wonderful bureaucracy, and everybody's wearing guns. Why do all the people in the upper levels of the bureaucracy have to wear guns? You know what happened? You get a different pay rate if you're carrying a weapon, you know? And of course, they have to be armed all day, as opposed to if you need to be armed, you go to an armory and get the weapons and go out and do something. But even the chief, when he goes to his meetings and goes to the city council and the rest of it, he has his weapon there, as if the chief of police is going to be pulling out his weapon, or be in a situation where he's going to have to do that to protect lives and property, or himself. So even though we're going down the road, I often say, the American experience, we're not yet 300 years old as a country. We're still a civilization in process. We've been in a position where, as a result of World War II and the reorganization of the world, we're literally world leaders. And we're the latest guys to come along. Will we make it to 300 years? Look at the dynamics of today. There's a tension. People beg the question. Will we make it 500 years? Will we be around as long as, I want to say, China or Egypt or something like that? And it may be, well, will we be like some of these folks in European countries that maybe make it for a couple of 100 years. Maybe if some of them don't even make it a couple of 100 years. They establish a nation state and it can't hold together because of religious differences or whatever like that. Thank goodness we have oceans that keep us from the rest of the world.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to, I just want to find out if you, is there anything else you want to say?
Well, I want to say that how appreciative I am that I had the opportunity to serve on the council. Because this kind of a discussion that I believe goes on at the council level, among council members and with members of the mayor's staff and the mayor, is often missed. Well, what's the benefit of your going to the city council? To be able to do these kinds of things on behalf of my constituents and to be part of a civic discussion and debate. This is what leadership is all about. And to be there to push and prod the managers to learn and have them learn from us as we bring our perspectives from the people who vote for us and what we believe. That's what contributes to the whole system working. And if that isn't addressed properly, you get disruption. And unfortunately, we have seen in other communities across the United States where with that not being done, and you hear of a Ferguson, Missouri. Why? Because it's white and black. How do people raise money in Ferguson, Missouri? Well, they give tickets. Well, who are the people most often ticketed driving through Ferguson, Missouri? Well, it wasn't black people. But if it wasn't for that ticket revenue, we would have fiscal problems at City Hall. Stuff like that is not fantasy. It's on the record. Federal government's going in, they reported all these things come up. How can that happen? Well, the United States is a great mosaic. You got the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. You have 50 states. Each state government has different roles that they assign to people to do the administration of municipalities and counties or however. And it's a big petri dish. And it's in this state and in this city, we're part of the petri dish response. We see things, we fund things, we do things, and it works. And in the framework of our city council, there's been a remarkable tendency through the years of us to be able to have a consistent working relationship among the 15, plus bringing the mayor, 16 city attorney. Our group works. And I think it's something that's remarkable about the Los Angeles City Council, that the council itself, the institution of governance at City Hall, doesn't get that much love. But we do it. We're still a world-class city. And all these things take place in the same 24-hour cycle that anybody else has out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody.